Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. We are live at Crop Connect 2020, and I have Kelly Dobson joining us again. Welcome. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
It is so nice to have you on, and we are going to be chatting about mentoring the next generation of farmers. So before we dive in, can you tell our audience a little bit about you and the work that you do?
Sure. So I own a business called Leadership Incorporated. Among other things, I'm also a farmer. Leadership is a leader development program focusing on small business and primarily the ag space. So we do provide executive coaching services, but one of the things we do is provide actual leader development and right to the farm gate. So we actually partner with Farm Management Canada, and we offer the National Farm Leadership Program, and that program just actually kicked off a couple weeks ago and runs for a year, and we have basically at this point yearly intakes and hoping to do more. So.
Excellent. So when we're chatting about developing the next generation, to me, I want to go to leadership as a high level because I think that conversation all stems from there. So you're a leadership guy, and you do leadership training for farmers. Why do you feel that is so important to this generation and to the upcoming generation?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad you brought this up as a topic because I think from a lot of the conversations that I have, I've been going around and doing presentations and workshops, and invariably what happens is that people will sort of saddle up afterwards. And I haven't been to one yet where there wasn't a generational transition about how do we make this work better come up. So I think you're dead on with the topic. Why does it matter? It matters to both generations because leadership matters. This is something that I think is finally, starting to get a little bit of traction in the ag space. It's been very seriously aware of and been addressed in many other sectors for decades. Absolutely. And so I think that the time has come that we are seeing that a lot of the opportunity, the upside is there's an enormous amount of opportunity to achieve more and to have more successful businesses by looking at ourselves and looking at the human side of it as opposed to the actual business, the nuts and bolts, the production side. And so this matters because one of the single biggest leadership, I would say, challenges that happens in any small business or family business is the farm transfer. It's that once in a generation CEO turnover, and that it's important in any organization. That's why they announce it on business news when a new CEO takes over a large organization. These are even higher impact in family businesses because they happen once a generation and you're dealing with family. So the stakes are high and there's a lot of different kinds of relationships going on at the same time. So it's a big deal. Important.
And that's why I wanted to have you on because on farms, we're often working with family members. Yep. And not only are we dealing with the coworker aspect, we're dealing with family, and that can add some layers. So, us that are running the farming operations right now, we're going to be developing ourselves, growing our farms, and many of us have the next generation coming up. I am curious, is it better now than it used to be? And let me kind of elaborate on that. Back in the day, we used to see the older generation, the founding generation, hold the reins forever and ever. The children, from my experience anyways, and you can tell me your thoughts on it, but the farm children would be on the farm, they'd be working, and sometimes the founding generation wouldn't even turn over the reins until they died, or it was very late in life and they weren't transparent with a lot of finances. The farm kids were laborers. I know that's probably, I hope, an old mentality. Is it a little bit better now? Please tell me it is. No. I don't have kids, so I'm curious.
So here's the thing. Couple things that come to mind with this. First of all, I'm noticing in the conversations that I'm having and in the clients we're working with, there are whopping differences in how this is going off. So there is a full experience. So the people who leadership tends to be working with are people who are, I would say, much more switched on. So in other words, they're here because they see the advantage and they're in it and they're engaged. Yes. So there's that side. And at the other, down the extreme, is there's still, and I see this consistently, and I field calls, but that often don't result in actually any actual services provided, where there is two generations trying to work, the older and the younger. And I think what is still happening is there is an inability, there are some basic fundamental interpersonal communications between those. Just like you said, there's not a lot of transparency about or even clarity around responsibilities. There's not clarity around the financial aspects. There's not even a clarity around expectations. The list, as long as you can list it out, there's just a lot of unspoken. And what often happens is that at the end of the day, and again, every story is unique, but I would say it leaves the younger generation really not really ill prepared to step into it. And I think this leads me to the bigger point. If you want to know what the big difference is that the complexity of the ag space and actual farming is dramatically different than it was, like, say, 20 years ago when I started, or 25 years ago, 25 years ago. It is enormously more complex and more higher stakes than I think it's ever been. There's just way more. We call it VUCA, and I guess I did this in the last episode, never talk about it, I can't bring it up, but what we call complexity of context, in other words, the space that we're trying to run our farms in, and actually the actual skill set of the actual people in it, and what we're seeing, this tension between the gap between the two, that's the hard part. And for those who are stepping up and getting people prepared, they're much closer to that, so they're able to handle it a lot better. Those that aren't working it out amongst themselves, they're having to do that in a space that is much more difficult than it was a generation ago, and certainly 2 generations ago. So, sadly, I've had conversations even very recently where, the quiet comment is, I don't think this is going forward.
That makes me sad, actually. I just was a little bit deflated there.
Yeah.
I was hoping it was a little bit better, because I'm going to rely on my experience, what I've seen, and also building my own business. So I'm going to say something unpopular, but my goal in life is not to say the popular things that sound good. My goal is to bring the ideas that are going to help us transition the farm on successfully and make sure that our family farms can continue on and on. So let's say I had a university-aged child. Okay. I'm going to send them off to university, and I'm probably going to tell them to go work a little bit, get some real world experience, and they're going to come back. My concern and thought when talking about doing this episode is how many parents bring those children back to the farm, and how many kids getting book smart, which is amazing and it's important, and don't get me wrong, the more knowledge we can have, the better. My concern is that they come back to the farm after having just been a farm hand all their life, doing the labor, putting the crops in, working with the animals, because a lot of parents can be very tight with the finances. It's uncomfortable. Yep. Now they come back expecting to take the operation over, and that is scary. Running a business at the size it is nowadays is scary. So why aren't we, as parents of the next generation, bringing them in as kids and talking about finances, having business meetings, working on the business part of farming?
The short answer is, in most cases, they don't know how.
Okay.
And this is this idea that we start, and most of this grades down to, it's really not a technical problem. Like, this is the part that is where we realize it's really not about that there aren't the tools to be able to run a successful farm. What we're seeing, and increasingly, is that it's the human side that hasn't kept up with the complexity of the business, and not only the environment, but even the farm itself. And so what often happens is that there is a real lack of of really interpersonal communication and really setting clear and having really clear communication between, not only between spouses about what we want to do, and actually communicating to that younger generation about what that might look like, and setting and having those really clear conversations, so that people then can make up their own, they're fully informed about what they're stepping into or not stepping into. I this morning, for example, we had the demographic specialist that was talking about.
He was fantastic.
About there's still this continuing exodus off the farm, and and certain ideas, like, for example, and farms aren't having children like they used to because they were having large amounts because it was a labor force, and now it's not about that. And I still say there is still an element to that. I think, from my gut telling me, there's still an element there that I think exists, and that there's still always a segment of younger generation that are coming to the farm that want to do the fun part. They want to farm, they want to run the big equipment, they like the farm, they like that rural lifestyle, and that they're not sort of stepped into or have been exposed to, okay, no, there's a business element. And even if they go to school, I think it's certainly the education is more important, but there's just, to the extent where what is the relationship? Like, what is the clear relationship between this upcoming generation and the one that already exists, and how can you define it? Because in some cases, it is a little more than just a farm employee. It's for the first time I don't have to work all the time. But when we get into more difficult circumstances, it's, well, is that younger generation empowered to make decisions? Do they know do they understand the full picture? And if those conversations haven't occurred, that's where often you get a lot of different conflicts, and there's just a lack of expectations, including, and this can go all over the place from younger, and again, so it's hard to come up with a singular, like, this is the stereotype, because I've got kids who are working to death and not getting fairly treated by their parents, and then you've got parents who feel absolutely angry and frustrated because their child refuses to show up to work and are being paid a salary that is that is far more than is commensurate with their experience and what they're actually contributing, and everything in between. And so the lack of this communication about expectations and understanding and onboarding, which I would call would just be onboarding this next generation, is really where a lot of this crux comes down. To be perfectly honest, and truthfully, and I would say to the final point to that, I said a lot of this is around parents not actually knowing what they want for themselves.
True.
And so they don't know what the next 10 years or 15 or 20 years looks like, even though that has an enormous impact on whether or not there's a viable farm operation or what that looks like as an opportunity for that upcoming generation, until they can actually clearly say, this is what we're thinking, this is what we want to do. We've done the investigation. It's going to require, we've got this amount of savings, we're having this much expectation of salary out of the farm under current conditions. This looks like this amount of money available, and this is the amount of work that I'm looking to do, and it's going to get less over time. And then that's the base. So, okay, that sounds reasonable. And then there can be some sort of give and take. If that ability doesn't happen, then people are basically left to make up their own stories about what's happening. And oftentimes, the wires will get crossed.
And then it's family, and then it's family dynamics, and then it's feuds, and then
it all comes out at the Christmas table or the birthday table or at the yeah.
Oh, and I guess that's not surprising, but I look at the business world. Okay? Yeah. I'm going to leave farming. I like to always say I have a foot in each door, right? I'm in the business world. I know how that operates, and then in the farm business world. And you look at any corporation, the person at the top didn't go to university and then hop, skip, and jump right into the CEO position.
No.
Chances are they worked through, they were involved in different roles, they learned how the operation worked, they have a very strong understanding of the business function before they grab those reins, the keys, and sign on the dotted line. And I guess you're right. I mean, if I, as the current generation, don't know where I'm going, don't know my plan, I guess that's the whole fear, succession planning, and then I'm not going to want to bring the kids in, I'm going to keep the books quiet.
Because I just don't know.
Because I just don't know what I'm doing, and I don't want them coming in so they can just help on the farm. But then, when I'm ready, hopefully I'm ready one day, and and I hand them the keys, my goodness gracious, the finances, the cash flow, the complexity of farms nowadays.
Well, and even the maturity to, like, when they get thrown in the deep end, and when the water really gets deep, and these are decisions that often require, everyone has to get their oar in the water and think about how they might want to approach. I would say the opposite end of this is I see many of the very successful farms, they have a completely different kind of relationship with their upcoming generation.
Really?
In which case, so yeah, they're being educated. Some are, but it's not, well, I'm going to get educated and then I'm coming back to the farm. Many are still working on the farm and are aware of what's going on the farm. And maybe this is where your question is going, but the real ability, I think the thing it hinges here is, one, it's communication, but the other part is an ability to be able to teach what you're talking about, this actual business side, in real time. And this is a part where oftentimes farmers are so concerned because of the way they design the farm. It's just about getting the work done for today and realizing, well, yeah, we have to get the work done, but we also have to be a teaching farm for this. So there has to be built-in education as we go through this. And that has a tendency to feel like it takes too much time. We can't tolerate any mistakes. We just need to get it done. And if we can't design farm practices and ways of farming that actually have the children, have that next generation coming up and being involved at certain times, understanding the why of what's going on. Like, they can see this, they can see the running of equipment, they can do all those things. But, like, for example, and this is maybe best told by a story, and this is some of how I've handled it with my kids. I've taken both my son and my daughter and have sat down and done the bank review with the banker, with them sitting there.
Wow.
Fully introduced them, sat them down, and saw how that interaction. Now, they were very young. Now, they were very young and they didn't really understand much what was going on.
That's perfect.
But the notion that they're just sitting there and they're observing. Another prime example was, everybody had a really tough fall. We ended up having all kinds of bins with all manner of different kinds of moistures and qualities and sort of state of grain, and it very quickly got to the point we weren't quite sure exactly what was what. And for a lot of, because we're moving and transferring, and we did have a really, really, really tough load get into a bin, and it was, this was a serious situation. So I've been here before, so I said, I thought, I'm not going to be able to keep this straight. Not only the fact is I'm running leadership and I'm just on the plane every 3 weeks doing something. So I sat them down, I got my son and my manager, the girl who works on the farm full time, she's a 24-year-old woman. And so I said, okay, we need to tap all these bins and we need to report on all the moisture. So they went around and took all this, and I said, okay, so which bins are safe? And then we had a conversation of what safe was, and we learned that maybe 10% moisture in a coal bin isn't exactly safe. I mean, it's safe for a while, but not so long. And then the next question, okay, so what's at risk with the fact we've got all of these different moistures? And they're like, well, what is that? What are we talking about? And I said, well, let's figure out some commodity prices on all this inventory in real time. What's the dollar figure of what's at risk here if we don't manage this? And if we lose a single bin, what is the risk here? And then all of a sudden the eyes get really big, because they're seeing like this is a order of magnitude more than their selling. I mean, it's in the hundreds of thousands. And they're seeing, they're not just tab bins moving around. And I said, okay, so here's our problem. What's our biggest problem? And you just sit, and this takes more time than what you might think, but in reality, I cannot tell you how much it lowered my blood pressure, in the sense that now I've had partners who are well aware of what's going on. And I said, okay, we've got this contract, go to the elevator, we're going to have to blend. I said, how are we going to manage this? And so we worked it through. And so they actually were part of that process of making sure we moved the right grain, and we did so in an ethical way so people knew what we were sending them. And then to follow all that up is, in the end, they were part of the text and shared text of when the loads unloaded at Bungie. Okay. They actually could see it, and then they could see the checks coming out back. And so they actually had the full loop of, they swathed it, they saw how bad it went down, how the moving, how we're going to get this dealt, what was at risk, and they actually could see the final end check product. And that seems like it would be, well, that's just too busy. It's not. A lot of this is digital. It's on your phone. You're having a cup of coffee. It's on the hood. By the way, here were the first 4 loads. Guess what? They're all like 8.5, 8.7 in the elevator. We did what we were supposed to do. Great job. How much left do we have to do? And they're like, we know exactly how much is left, and we had another truck coming. Where is it going? They're not. They've never been in this space before. But with a little bit of time of showing them and then holding them part of the problem, like inviting them to be part of this problem, that's partnership in real time. And so that leads on to, they know what bins to be looking for. Right now, while I'm here having this conversation with you. Excellent. But if we don't take that time and integrate, we're not just hauling grain, we're not just filling bins, but we're educating and doing inventory and cash flow and quality and marketing and putting it all together as an actual ongoing in the real-time conversation. that doesn't happen if you're not intentional about it.
This is what I like. That is what I mean. In business, you have mentorship and you learn if you have good mentors, but in the farm world, I like that idea of bringing them in on the decision making, not just, well, why? Go empty the bin and bring it to the elevator. Because I told you to. That doesn't teach them anything. So you know what I've learned? The leadership guy practices what he preaches. Yes. Good job.
And I've been in the other side. I've been where I've shoveled inordinate number of flat bottom bins into trucks, and couldn't feel like my toes with at the end of it, and having my parents whistle off to the elevator, pick up the checks, run to town, and you never actually saw the connection between what you did and what happened, and feeling and what that feels like when you don't really know why this matters.
Yeah.
Because when you can connect, we need this cash, we need this sale, we need this relationship, and this actually flows through to paying the harvest. Like when they actually start the connectivity of, then they start looking at those bins as quality and as dollars and as amounts of money, and they can connect that to a much larger picture. And then you flip up the spreadsheet and you start seeing the connection of inventory, and then they can start seeing the various parts. It's not just about, and why might that auger really need to run when we need it most? Yeah. And what's at risk if we can't? And all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm just not asked to do something. Like, I don't even know why this even matters. I can do it tomorrow.
Yes.
Well, what happens about tomorrow? Like maybe we can, and maybe we can't.
Well, and you know what I hear? Education, mentoring, and a lot less resentment versus, oh, I'm just the farmhand doing this, right? Oh, why do I always have to do this? Oh, I get why they're asking me. They told me why we're doing this. They told me why I gotta go do it when it is minus 30 because it needs to happen now because of XXX.
And we didn't get there overnight. And many of this is it's coming up. It's creating a space where realizing that the investment of 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 minutes worth of conversation seems like we could be running a lot of equipment and doing a lot of things, but that amount where people actually understand what's really going on and what's really people all of a sudden, like with this notion where everybody's putting their heads together and then they're providing information that maybe I didn't even know about. Like, well, actually that's not what happened. And you're like, what? And you're like, no, they didn't do that load, or that load hasn't been unloaded in that. And they're like, well, where is it? And then it's this idea of really putting it together, and then for them to be able to put the parts together. But I have to be willing to step into that space as that farmer, and being able to listen and to realize that before I just have that overwhelming urge to just start making decisions or start doing stuff, that I got to bring everybody else into that conversation and bring them on board. And there is a level of transparency, but what I found is that I don't feel vulnerable. I quickly get over the idea of feeling vulnerable about being transparent about all the information, and I feel that what it really does in the end of the day is that actually there are more people covering or taking on a commensurate amount of responsibility about what's really going on. So there's no surprises in February when we're wondering how this errant load got in the bin or whatever it might be. So, and that's where it gets easier, not harder. It's hard at the beginning, but the payoff is
taking that first step, right? That would be hard. But then once you're in that space, it gets easier and easier, right?
Yep.
Love it. Yep. I love that. Now, I want to take the wisdom in your mind on leadership and the topic of developing the next generation. Now, for our audience that's out there, and we have children coming up as the next generation, and whether they're 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, what are some ideas, different business practices? I don't even want to call it business practices. What are some ideas on how we can start to develop them as future farm owners versus, hey, go out there and feed chop to the cattle?
Well, I think we highlighted one already, and I think the first one is to maybe invite ourselves what it might be like to be more transparent about what this business really works like would be the first thing. And I think the ultimate goal at every encounter with any employee, and it doesn't need to be a farm child, but any employee, is trying to connect in everything that they do, a connection between what this means to what we're trying to achieve, and what are the intended consequences, and what happens, and what are the potential unintended consequences if we don't. And that shows up in things like, why does it really matter to go and take an hour and a half to go retrieve one errant rock out of a field that you knew was there that got missed, and because it can easily get forgotten, and realizing, well, it's not just one rock, or it is a $25,000 or $30,000 rotor damage to a combine. And what are the consequences of that beyond just the downtime, and the crop doesn't get off? And so what I'm finding continually doing is that if we can actually, and I think for kids particularly, because we're dealing in what we call like a complicated domain, or even a complex domain, where the notion of cause and effect aren't instantly known. So in other words, we may think that we're doing this, and we don't actually understand the unintended consequences. For someone coming into a new environment, they may not understand the full consequences of their actions, and a lot of this where it shows up is in ideas of money and finance, where oftentimes they don't understand the cost benefit of any particular action relative to what it might cost if we do or don't do something. And that can be something as simple as properly inflated tires and cleaning windows and the basic stuff, to the idea of what it might be like to actually finish and start on time. Being aware of like what's the difference between why does it matter to properly maintain something and have something ready before versus after. And if people can understand the consequence, for example, I'll give you one more example on our farm. We were pouring in coolant into our semi at a rate of probably a gallon every couple days, so about every 10 hours, and it was a constant problem. We were continually doing it and realizing, this can't stand. So we basically took it in to get looked at, and sure enough, it's a twin turbo diesel, for all you guys know that, or cat. So that is, just to do half that is a $19,000 deal. Ouch. Right? So the truck was gone, and what I made special time at a particular coffee time to sit down and lay that bill out so that everybody can understand what it really costs to run that engine, and so they could see all the costs associated with that. And so when they can see the difference between, well, we have this coolant and we have this experience, but now we understand there's the real bill of what it was, and that everybody got a chance to look at it. And I would say one more strategy that comes to this, so it's like a financial transparency is one. One of the things we do oftentimes is we do what we call experiential learning. So, okay, $25 word, but what this is that take a successful experience, or even an unsuccessful experience, and collectively go through what happened what happened, let's reflect on what happened, like why did it work so well, why did it not work so well, and what we might want to do, like how could we make that, do more of that, or how we might want to not do that going forward, and then what is the strategy going forward? So what's the change or the thing we're going to keep going? And I've incorporated this on the farm because I've got I've got younger people coming on all the time. And so what you realize is when somebody does something well, we explain, we show that as a success and a win. But we've also done it when somebody's dumped like a $6,000 welderator off the forks of a tractor that was brand new, and now it's got more bent corners, and having to have a conversation about why that happened and why we don't pick it up from the bottom, and why we hook it from the top, and what the consequences of that are. Yeah. And once people realize that, so in other words, it's not, and so this is really a much bigger conversation about how do we frame failure, because this is the part about learning on the farm, is that we're all constantly looking for safe to fail activities that people can try. They're not going to be particularly masterful at. They're going to take a long time. There's going to be mistakes made, and that's part of the teaching process. So you're going to have to accept spilt oil, crimped hoses, stuck equipment, all sorts of stuff, and realize that every one of those moments, as much as they might make you churn, that totally. Every one of those is an opportunity for learning and development, to the point where oftentimes I'm finding myself, as I've taken this on quite seriously, that when we're moving large equipment or doing stuff, that oftentimes we'll just stop and we'll say, okay, we're going to do this thing, and because the first thing it'll say is, I don't feel comfortable with this. You do this difficult maneuver, and I'm like, well, I could. But we're not going to learn anything if we do that. And this would be a lot quicker, yeah. But you know what? It's like, nope, we're going to do it. This is what we're going to, and so you work through that, and it's like, oh, this is going to be hard. And you're like, yep, but here's all the strategies, and we'll be right with you when you do it. And they go through it, and they do it, and taking those, which feel like a long time, and sure, has it added a few hours, but the point is now I don't have to do that thing anymore. and they're in a position where they're actually out there and competent, and now they're maybe training other people. But if I don't create spaces for that and make that it's safe for them to do that, and that it's part of it, because they're not going to learn it naturally, and that part of this is failing. Like, part of this is that there's going to be tires that are going to get peeled off. There's going to be things that aren't going to go well. That's part of it, but it needs to be within the realm of what's acceptable and safe to fail.
I love it. It reminds me of a key idea I want to share with you. But first off, it reminds me of a meme that's floating around on the internet. I don't know if you've seen it. You guys out there probably have. It's this little boy with his face all scrunched up. And the wording says, "The look on your dad's face when you're backing up a trailer." Because it's counterintuitive when you back up, right? And that's a hard thing to learn. And actually, I had the same experience. I had bought a camper, was getting better, but then you're in a campground backing up with all these people, and I just said, "No, Dad, you do it, hop in," right? I was pretty young, and he said, "No, you're gonna do it because you need to learn," and safe to fail. I wasn't gonna run over anybody or
no one was gonna
trees.
Let you make a mistake.
Yeah, but he could have did it. He could have backed it in, and we could have been having beverages and hot dogs a lot quicker, right? But I would have never learned. So,
and just the other side of that, just there's a flip side to this, is that after that starts happening, the next thing that happens is that they actually, well, I don't know why we ever do that. We could just do it this way. And you look at that and you're like, oh, that is better. Yeah, do it that way. And then you start realizing for the first time, maybe some of the things we've been doing, or I've been doing, and the way I've been doing it isn't the only way to do it, and that there may be an actual simpler, easier, or more effective way that actually is. And I'm running into this more and more. The more experience they get, the more I'm realizing that they've actually got some stuff figured out that actually works better for them and has equivalent results. And so I'm seeing that more, and I'm also noticing, and I talk about this when I speak, my skill set over time when we're in this business actually evolves. So there's some things I'm much better at than I was 20 years ago. And there's certain skills as a senior person on my farm that are not as good as they were 20 years ago. And acknowledging that and letting them take over is a big part of having to accept that. Then that's just the natural environment. And I talk about this all the time about trying to farm with transition lenses. Like, I don't drift on farmers. I just overspray by a nozzle and a half, or I cannot. Like, I had one of my buddy on sunflower board. We can't put an 85-foot auger in a bin to save our life anymore because we have no depth perception. So now that was one of my really good skills I could do. I was like offering hours. Now I just don't, because I can't. And the 24 has never done it, maybe done it 4 times, is actually just as competent as I am, because at least they can see where the spout is relative to the bin.
This almost sounds like some form of natural evolution to make sure that the older generation steps off and the younger ones step in. It almost sounds uniquely designed.
Well, and this is the part where we spend a lot of time. Part of what we do in leadership is that, we have high potentials in the program that are 24 years old, but we also have 50-year-olds and north of 50 who are actually learning about what would it be like to step into a role of chairman of the board as a coach. In other words, I'm not the one, the doer anymore. I'm the wisdom, I'm the helper, I'm the supporter. And we see this time and again where and we even had older employees where they're expected, you're going to go and you're going to show them how to do that. And you're going to stand there and watch. And, and does it seem like it costs money? Yeah. But the point is, we also have continuity of talent and ability through the farm. There's none of this, which goes against a lot of the farm mentality to run into, where they just want to hire people who are good to go. They don't want to spend any time on training and development. They don't want to, and that might work in truck drivers, but if you're talking about developing the next generation that are going to take over your farm business, this is the stuff that in very short order, like in a matter of a handful of hours, suddenly they're just engaged and they actually understand consequences. They understand what happens when they do or don't do something and the impacts of that. And that can be taught by showing them and having that experience. Otherwise, it's just, why don't you know that? I mean, I grew up with because why don't you know this? And I'm like, because I don't know.
You didn't teach me.
You didn't teach me that. And now I have this really negative experience to have to package, as opposed to saying, you know what, we're going to reframe all this. Learning and failure is just a part of what it is, and create that. And that's not even at the financial level, like marketing decisions, dealing with a lot of some of this more difficult stuff, making them sit at a financial year end at the farm, not just going and signing leave, but no, we're going to all sit down and we're going to do it. Yeah, would it be more productive if you wanted to wrench on equipment? Would you rather be doing that? Yes, but if you really want to do this, this is part of it.
Yeah. You know what? It's the hard stuff, but it's the important stuff. And you don't talk to a single farmer out there, well, maybe you might, but most farmers want their farm to continue on and on successfully and stay in business. So that's where I'm coming in with this episode. Why aren't we properly developing the next generation of farmers? And you've shared a lot of great stuff there. What was the word that you said? Fail safe?
Safe to fail.
Safe to fail.
Yeah.
I like that because you know what? In real life, you learn more from your mistakes. Well, one, you learn from actually doing, not just being
experiential
told.
Learning. Yep.
There you go. And number two, unfortunately, as much as we don't like it, we learn more from our mistakes than we do from our wins. Wins are fun.
Yeah.
Mistakes, if we actually look at it and evaluate, we learn. That's where we learn the most.
It's an actual field of study, and they call it, to a certain part of it, it's called grit. And so what they're showing is that there's more evidence to show that actually this determination, in other words, just reframing of failure and understanding failure and learning how to take it as information and then try again, is actually this, and being masterful at that process has a higher incidence of, and more, is more strongly correlated to ultimate success of anything than actually intelligence is.
I believe it.
And I'll say that again. In other words, being smart is really good, but the person who's prepared to learn from failure is actually a higher, and this has been applied in any number of domains, that it's a higher predictor of long-term success than how smart somebody actually is.
Amen. I agree. Okay, so those were a lot of great ideas, and I know our audience, they're gonna love it, and I hope they implement it, because my slogan that I'm working on for the show, and it's really starting to hit home with me, is your farm, your legacy, build it to last.
Yeah.
And to me, there's so many parts to that conversation, the financial, the production, but also the build it to last. If we want it to last for generations, we need to make sure that the next generation has the skill set and the desire to make that farm last, right?
I couldn't agree more, and I would say the only thing I would add to that is that we're talking about a much bigger game, and we've talked about this in previous episodes. We're not just talking about the results side of production side, but we're really talking about that they actually understand how to confront, like part of what we do. I'll give you another example, one final comment. What do we do when a supplier screws up?
We yell at them logically, right?
Now, I could go and have that conversation, but a lot of times, and I do, but I've had times where now they'll go, I want to follow in, I want to be on that converation. I want to see how you're going to handle that in front. And so they're like, because I'm not sure, because they're like, to be honest with you, I don't know what I would say with the fact that they didn't do what they said they were going to do when they said they were going to do it, and that's had a negative consequence. And so this is a much bigger deal, that it's really about teaching them how to manage these high level relationships and how to take care of themselves. Like, this is a bigger part that the part that I've realized, and every farmer, I think farm dad or parents have to realize, is how influential we are on our children. They are watching a lot, and a lot of this is about how we handle ourselves in these very difficult circumstances and how we take care of ourselves. They will inevitably model that. So there's a lot there. There's a lot on that children's shoulders, and I think, to be truthful, if we want successful farms and farm businesses, we have to accept that it's not just showing them how to run equipment and how to get the work done. That is absolutely true, but there's a much bigger game of play that we've got to focus on. So
I love it. So I was going to get you to share some words of wisdom, but those were pretty wise. Do you have anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just say this, and if anybody feels like they're saying, I don't know how to do that, or I'm not sure, that sounds like, or you can think of a circumstance where you wish that you could have done that and didn't, I would say that that's extraordinarily human, and I would just invite that the bigger part of this is that this can be trained. If you don't feel like that's who you are, you don't feel like you could step into that, you're not alone. I think you're in good company, and that's a big part of what leader development is about. Is actually learning, is working so that we don't have any, so that we have no wheelhouse. That yes, we're playing to our strengths, but we're also working hard so that we don't have weaknesses that are gonna threaten the actual viability of the business in the long term, and that everybody's working on that total package. And that to do that, they're gonna have to train, and they're gonna have to practice, and they're gonna have to work on it. It's gonna be part of the whole thing. And that's basically that's what I do.
Wise words indeed. So if our audience would like to learn more about you and your work, how can they find out more about you?
Any number of ways. They could contact me at my cell number. So it's 204-483-0197. Website leader-shift.ca. And if you want to register as a user because you're interested in being with the program, you can go to leader-shift.ca, registered as user, and that way we get your contact information and we can get in touch with you. Any one of those ways would work.
Excellent. I want to thank you for joining us again. I always enjoy chatting with you. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I love the ideas that you're bringing to the farming space. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
You're very welcome. And thank you guys for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, like, subscribe, and comment. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, see you guys next week. Bye.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.